Good evening and welcome. My name is Lucy Brenton, and I've got great news. Only 7 short days until the attack ads end, and we can get back to Hoosier hysteria, sugar cream pie, and preparing our homes for the holidays for our families. I'm just like you. I'm a mom, a businesswoman, and yes, a senatorial candidate, and I'm here to share solutions with you this evening. First, I will uphold and defend the Constitution and fight any politician that tries to take your rights away. I will work to repeal every unconstitutional law. Second, we must have economic stability, and that means lowering taxes and reducing spending. Our children should not have to face the boondoggle spending that the old parties have done that only paid off their big business buddies. And third, your individual rights are at stake. You should have the right to do whatever you want, as long as you don't hurt anyone else or take their stuff. Tomorrow, you should wake up more free than you are today. Thank you.
Let's jump into the questions. This first one is a quickie. The Debate Commission frequently hears from voters like retiree Vance Witham Jr. of Arcadia, who wants to know why candidates don't answer the questions asked. In the interest of voters who are watching tonight, I'm going to ask each of you to just answer with a yes or no. Will you pledge to confine your answers to the questions asked tonight? Let's begin here with Senator Donnelly.
Sure, I've always answered the questions asked.
Mr. Braun?
I'll do the same.
And Mrs.
Yes,
Brenton?
my track record proves I'm the only one.
On now to the news of the day. This is a question straight from the headlines today. The president said that he plans to end birthright citizenship through executive order. Senator Lindsey Graham has said that he will introduce legislation to support the president's plan. Would you vote to end birthright citizenship? It goes first to Senator Donnelly. Mrs. Brenton, to you.
Thank you. Mike talks about the leader that's in Washington, D.C., but what if your leaders are doing the wrong thing? Should you support them or blindly follow them? I would say no. We do have the 14th Amendment, just like we have other amendments of the Constitution, to make clear what the laws are in our country and what the master contract is. No one is above the law. No one makes unilateral decisions in this country. We got rid of King George for a reason, right? Can we at least agree on that? King George is gone. We're not replacing him with King Trump. No one is going to make unilateral decisions in our country. Now, if there's more law that's brought forward, will you even be surprised? What is the politician's answer to everything? We've got to make a law. Part of that's their ego. They want their name on a law. I'm not into that. What I want to know is this legislation something that's going to be good for our country, or is it going to violate the Constitution like so many of our laws have? Let's use that as the standard once again, the Constitution.
Moving on now to another question about immigration. The conversation around immigration has flared up recently, it's fair to say. It's been a pretty divisive topic recently. And a number of voters this year submitted questions on related issues, such as the proposal for a border wall and the protection of dreamers. One of those voters is here with us, Patrice Widener, a retired career coach and IT manager from Carmel. Patrice?
What would you do specifically to encourage positive U.S. policy approaches to immigration?
Mrs. Brenton?
Positive policies on U.S. immigration. That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. America has been the melting pot. At least it was in the cartoons that I watched growing up. Maybe you remember those that you could sing along with and learn about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We're the greatest country in the world because we welcomed the greatest minds in the world to come here and to make a better life. The reason we've got problems right now is because the incentives are skewed, because we're welcoming people, in some cases, that think that they can come and freeload off of our country. And unfortunately, that casts a bad light on the people that are willing to bring their time and their talents here. They may not have treasure, and that should not keep them out of our country. It shouldn't be like winning the lottery. $5,000 to come into our country might as well be $5 million for someone from a poor country. If they're willing to work, they should be willing to come here, and we should be willing to accept them.
Our next question from the live audience comes tonight from Corey Holland, a pharmacist from Indianapolis. Corey?
Good evening. My question is, now that the health care mandate has been removed, what specifically will you do to ensure that health care insurance premiums remain affordable for middle and lower income families?
The question goes first to Mrs. Brenton.
Thank you. It's a good question. How do we keep health care affordable for middle income families? Well, I think the first thing that we can agree on is that government does not work. More expensive, less efficient, costs go up, care goes down. So by removing government and taking government out of the position of being in between the person receiving the care and the person providing the care, we'll be able to remove all the costs of government that are associated with it. Second, there's just a short vignette from my personal life. I've had 10 children. When I had a midwife-assisted birth at a hospital with excellent insurance because I worked at the phone company, it was over $14,000 for a non-medicated birth with no OBGYN and not a single aspirin. That same birth at home for a different child was $4,000 with a midwife. You see, when government gets involved and healthcare gets involved, insurance companies have to make a profit. So we've got to take those levels of administration out of it.
Mrs. Brenton, you indicated you wanted a response. You have 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. There are already free market solutions in place for healthcare. Liberty Share, MediShare. There are already organizations that have tackled the problem, the Unaffordable Care Act. It really is the Unaffordable Care Act. Because the insurance companies were allowed to write the laws, of course they wrote them for themselves. Of course they hurt the American people when they did it, because they all wanted to line their pockets, and that's what politicians do and have done, and you can't expect anything different. Let the free market decide. You making decisions for your family is the best way to go.
All right, we have another question now. Moving on to Jill Koyman, who's joining us here, a fundraiser for a local educational institution from Indianapolis. Over to you.
Hello. Easily accessible and free or low-cost contraceptives have proven to be an effective way to reduce unintended pregnancies. What is your position on providing low-cost or free contraceptives to reduce abortions by reducing unintended pregnancies?
Mrs. Brenton.
Thank you. I have 10 children. So the idea of contraceptives is something that I am very much interested in. Are there days that I want that to be retroactive if they haven't done the dishes? Probably. Of course contraceptives should be affordable. Of course they should be widely available. Let's make sure that they're safe and effective, and let's make sure that people know how to use them properly. And if you choose to have 10 children, as my husband and I did, and that was our goal, then great. But if that's not the choice that you want to make for your family, then you simply make a different choice. But let's also make sure that there aren't unintended consequences and that there are, some sort of common sense rules. I have a 14-year-old daughter. If she's seeking contraceptives, I think I have the right as her parent and the responsible party to know about it. So let's make sure that it doesn't become a free-for-all, but that we inject Hoosier common sense and American values into reducing the number of abortions by making contraception widely available and inexpensive.
That's the sanctity of all life.
Mrs. Brenton, you have 30 seconds.
I hear a lot of politicians talking about the sanctity of life. Here's the life that I don't hear them talking about. I don't hear them talking about the children and the wedding parties that we've drone bombed. So sad. I don't hear them talking about the death penalty. You see, the politicians are all pro-death when it plays great on the news, but when it comes to actually protecting life, they're happy to send our sons and daughters into endless foreign wars, like Afghanistan. Do you even know why we're in Afghanistan? It's because there's lithium in the Afghan mountains. You should look at that, and then look at your iPhone and realize there's lithium in that too. Put two and two together.
Moving on now to the deficit. Our next question comes from Horace Tucker, a retiree in Columbus, who wants to know your plans to balance the federal budget. More specifically, would you support increasing revenue as through raising taxes, or cutting spending as through defense or entitlements? Mr. Braun, the question goes to you first.
That's where you'd start.
Mrs. Brenton.
Blah, 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 blah. Reduce spending, lower taxes, increase revenue. What does all of this mean in the context of the last 150 years of Republican and Democrat domination in our society? It doesn't mean anything, because they talk about this, but then as soon as they get elected, it doesn't matter whether they're wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt, they still vote to raise your taxes, and they don't reduce spending. Do you want to actually hack at the roots of evil? Then you've got to end the biggest part of our budget, which is just going out the window, and that's interest on the federal debt. End the Federal Reserve. We must abolish the Federal Reserve and repudiate the debt, repudiate the interest that we are paying on money that they create out of thin air. It's a complex issue, but here's what you have to know. It doesn't matter how much we reduce our spending, Doesn't matter how much we increase revenue if we're paying interest to a group of bankers that have controlled our country since 1913.
Mrs. Brenton, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Yes. Let's talk about how much federal debt there is out there that we're not talking about the unfunded liabilities, about the yoke that has been put of economic slavery on every single one of our children, born and not yet born if they're lucky enough to get born. Which of you would give up your favorite federal program if it meant that you could abolish the federal income tax? I've got a list of them that I would give up. But this is what it boils down to. You can take every asset in this country and you can give it over to the Federal Reserve and it still won't pay off the debt. Take our country back and end the Fed.
No world.
Mrs. Brenton, you have 15 seconds as well.
Everything that they've just said is smoke and mirrors. They're trying to distract you from the real problem. We're talking about what we're going to do to balance the budget. Money in is money out, and if money out is going to a corporation that has been taking interest on our money and our hard work for our lives all the way back to 1913, you've got to hack at the evil and stop it.
To our next topic, foreign policy. President Trump has made the alliance with Saudi Arabia a cornerstone of his foreign policy. He stood by the leadership even after U.S. intelligence concluded they were directly involved in the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. He's also failed to condemn the Saudi-led bombing in Yemen, where more than 16,000 civilians have been killed. Do you support the president's stance? The question goes to Mrs. Brenton first.
Why are we still playing footsie with regimes that murder? What's really at stake here is how do we end our dependence on foreign oil? When we have more oil in Alaska, allegedly, than they have in Saudi Arabia, why are we not mining it? Why are we not drilling for that oil? Why are we continually allowing our country's economy to be dependent on a foreign power and staying in their good graces? Let's end our dependence on foreign oil. And it's not just about solar, although that's part of it. It's not just about wind. I'm not a fan. But it's also about hemp. It's about biodiesel. It's about alternative forms of energy. And in order to make this happen, we've got to get government out of this. As soon as government gets involved in something, it slows down, it gets more expensive, and it requires your tax dollars, first stolen from you, to fund something that they think is a good idea for their big business buddies.
Before we move on, just to follow up, your answer then is no, you do not support the president's stance?
That is correct. I do not support President Trump supporting the Saudis.
Mrs. Brenton, you indicated you'd like a response.
Yeah, I see the partisanship in the answers here. You know, I've got to agree with Senator Donnelly. We've got to fight for our farmers, and more choices are better than less choices. And that's why I was talking with somebody from the hemp industry today. And what I found out is that there are businesses in Indiana right now that are importing, one single business in Elkhart is importing 100,000 pounds of hemp fiber to make their products every single week. Why are they not walking across the street and writing the check to a Hoosier farmer?
A lot of topics to cover, so I do want to move on now to domestic matters. We have another question from the audience. We're joined by Emily Weichert Bryant, an attorney in Indianapolis and executive director of the state's Food Bank Association, Feeding Indiana's Hungry. Emily?
Thank you. There are nearly 1 million Hoosiers who are at risk of hunger and may not know from where their next meal will come. More than 600,000 residents, roughly 10%, rely on the federal SNAP benefit. Nearly half of all of Indiana's students receive free and reduced lunches. If elected, what will you do to alleviate hunger in Indiana and to support anti-hunger programs?
Mrs. Brenton, over to you.
Thank you for Feeding Indiana's Hungry. I feed a lot of hungry people too. I'm a mom of 10 kids. I know what it's like to have to budget and to think about what each meal is going to cost and can I stretch those food dollars for the whole month. It's horrifying to think that anyone in this country should go hungry for even a single meal. We're the best country in the world. We're the land of plenty. We have lots of resources. So if we have a lot of resources and they're not getting to the right people, what's the problem that we really need to fix? Well, let's look at farm bills. Let's look at nutrition. Who here knows that you can go and use SNAP benefits and you can buy things with high fructose corn syrup. You can buy soda pop. What is that? That's not something to help people and feed them. It's a gift to Coca-Cola. It's a gift to big businesses to allow funds that should be set aside for real nutrition and real food to just go down the drain with Doritos and soda pop. Stop that.
We need to get entrepreneurs, folks that have done it in the real world, not career politicians.
Mrs. Brenton, you wanted to respond. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. About doing things in the real world. I've done that in my home. I've done that with a budget. I've invited other children over to our home to eat. Here's what it really boils down to, and I've got to admit, Mike's a little bit part right in this. Don't quote me. But here's the thing. It should be a states' rights issue. It's up to the states to feed its own people. The bigger we grow federal government, the bigger the bureaucracy gets, the more expensive it gets, the further away it gets from the people that it helps. Let Indiana feed Hoosiers. We can do it together.
Let's move on now to a question a lot of people are talking about in the country, that is sexual assault. We have a question from Jenna Childress, a student in Bloomington, and she asks, in the wake of Brett Kavanaugh confirmation and the Me Too movement, how will you fight to protect the rights of sexual assault survivors? More specifically, what can you say to the women out there, 1 out of every 3 of whom will experience some kind of physical or sexual assault in their lives in this country? What can you say to them to encourage them to come forward? Mrs. Brenton.
I'm 1 out of 3. I'm a woman, and I had my Me Too moment. It's up to us to raise good people. It's up to us to create a culture where victims, male and female, can come forward and be believed. It's up to us to remove the shame and the stigma. Society is sending the message to these victims that it's not okay to have been assaulted. And until we deal with that problem, that cultural problem, we're going to continue to have people that are too ashamed to come forward. We've got another correlating problem, and that's allocation of resources. Thousands of rape kits sit untested while people who are nonviolent are in jail for drug crimes. That's got to stop. Society must say enough is enough. We're going to make sure that these rape kits are made a priority so that other people can be protected, and put the right people in jail, the violent and the assaulting, not the nonviolent.
Moving on now to another topic, that is the topic of diversity. The next question comes from the Debate Commission. If elected, how will you commit to bringing diversity into your leadership and senior staffing, including women, African Americans, and other underrepresented groups? The question goes first to Mrs. Brenton.
It's a really interesting question to ask of a libertarian because I don't see color. I don't see the differences in people that are shallow. I want to quote Martin Luther King, because he said he's more interested in the content of your character. People of color don't want to be given some sort of bone because of the color of their skin. They want to earn the right to be there, just like anyone would. There is no way that we should be making value-based decisions simply based on someone's exterior appearance. Haven't we moved past that as a culture? Can't we see what's inside someone? Can't we look at what are their skills and are they appropriate? Let's not look at a bar graph to decide if we have the right number of this or the right number of that. Let's look at the people and the individuals themselves.
Another question now from the voters. Several voters indicated last time that they weren't satisfied with your answers to a question about climate change in the first debate. So the Commission would like to give you another chance tonight. This is a question from Carolyn Nellis of Evansville, who asks this: what will you do? What specifically will you do to combat climate change if I were to vote for you in November? And that question goes to Mrs. Brenton, to you.
Thank you. I feel like this question was directed at me so that all of you that have your Senate debate bingo cards out can write down hemp again. And maybe you'll get bingo this time. And if not, unicorns, alligators, and Chuck Schumer's puppet. So I hope you filled in some squares there. Global effort to clean the oceans. We are killing Mother Earth. We're just decimating her. Talked about this last time. Clean oceans, seeding the phytoplankton with heme iron, fixing carbon. This is where hemp comes in. This is where biodiesel comes in. This is where we have to talk about ethanol needing 128% input to get 100% output. It's not the miracle fuel from corn. I mean, the fact of the matter is you can mash up corn or hops or a lot of different things and make alcohol and run a vehicle on it. But is it really the best thing for the environment? Hemp will fix carbon. That takes care of the carbon problem. Hemp can be used for biodiesel. Hempcrete, gosh, just Google it. You guys all got Google, right? Oh, and by the way, it gives farmers more choices than just corn, because after all, there is more than corn in Indiana.
We're moving on now. It's time for the final question of the evening. I'm afraid we have to move on, Senator. This, too, comes from a Hoosier voter. Brad Carpenter, a chemist in Fishers, asks this. If you are elected, what single issue would you make your top priority to address or to fix during your time in office? Each of you will have 30 seconds to answer, no time for rebuttals. And I believe this first question goes to Mrs. Brenton.
Boy, after all of that, I've forgotten the question. Would you mind repeating it?
Not at all. We're asking what your single issue would be as your top priority to address or fix once in office.
Thank you. The top priority is and always will be reducing the size, putting a muzzle on it, and making the federal government stay to the simple Constitution. The reason we have all this craziness, the reason that there are favors to hand out and billions of dollars to hand out to big businesses is because the size of the federal government has grown. And you know, I saw an ad with Senator Donnelly chopping up some wood, and it reminded me of this. The forest dwindled, and yet the trees voted for the axe because its handle was made of wood, and they thought it was one of them.
Candidates, thank you.